Russian progress turned out to be different from what I anticipated. I thought that they would go in on 3 or 4 operational axes and cut deeply into Ukraine. Instead, and of course, I did not have a copy of the operations order, so I didn't know what the instructions to Russian commanders were. But the Russian commanders were instructed to minimize casualties on the Ukrainian side. In other words, they knew they were going into eastern Ukraine, where most of the population is effectively Russian, but they also didn't want to do any unnecessary collateral damage. They wanted to avoid unnecessary collateral damage as much as possible. So instead, they advanced on a front of almost 500 kilometers in these battalion tactical groups, which is an interesting and a good organization for combat. I think it's proven itself in many ways. But this spread them very thinly. And I think the underlying assumption was that many of the Russians there would rapidly come over to them, which would ease their progress through Ukraine. But then the Russians themselves discovered, these are the Russian commanders, that they had made a terrible mistake in Moscow in one area. They had told the Russians in eastern Ukraine, well, we're coming in, we're going to destroy Ukrainian forces, effectively denazified, as I think your listeners have heard. And then we're going to leave. And we're not going to stay permanently. We're simply interested in the autonomy or independence of the 2 breakaway republics in the east and legitimizing Crimea. Well, the Russian population said, that's fine, then don't expect any help from us, because if you're not going to stay here permanently and liberate us from the Ukrainians, then when you leave, the Ukrainian secret police will roll in and kill all of us and our families. Well, that had a big impact in Moscow. People finally began recognizing that this was about much more than just destroying the Ukrainian army. That was essential. And that has taken time, largely because the Ukrainians decided to move into cities and urban areas and to prepare defenses and to sit down and wait for the Russians to arrive. The Ukrainians have never launched an operational counteroffensive. There have been minor counterattacks here or there on a battalion level, but nothing organized across the front. So the Russians then changed their modus operandi. And they recognized that if these Ukrainian forces were going to immobilize them in defensive positions in cities or elsewhere, well, that's when you bring in your strike forces, your artillery, rocket artillery, conventional artillery, tactical ballistic missiles, and you pulverize them out of existence. That's what they've done. And the Ukrainians have not managed to organize any serious counterattack. They talked about a 1 million-man counteroffensive recently, which of course never materialized. And no one knows what the exact casualty figures are, but I can tell you the ones that are being floated in the West about the Russians are grossly exaggerated. The Russians have lost somewhere between 11 and 12,000 killed and another 15, 20,000 wounded. But the Ukrainians are looking at upwards of 60,000 dead. And how many thousands more beyond that were wounded is anybody's guess. Many people have died of wounds because of inadequate medical care and medical infrastructure. So the Ukrainian army is decimated. The Ukrainians have lost this war. The initiative has passed very early permanently to the Russians. The Russians have pulled most of their regular forces back. That's their regular army. They've rested and refitted them, and I expect a major offensive this month to finish off the fight to Odessa and then probably Kharkov. I'd be very surprised if that didn't happen. And the fight has been carried on largely by the Donetsk militia. These are the forces out of the 2 breakaway republics. They fought very effectively, by the way, and they've taken heavy casualties on occasion, but they're not the regular Russian army. They have been given equipment. They've got a lot of tanks that they've been given for use as assault guns. After the artillery pulverizes the concrete fortifications, the assault guns are brought up, and at point blank range, they're annihilating whatever is left. That is essentially tactically what's been going on. He's also had mercenaries. The Wagner organization has been part of that. And he's had the Chechens, who fought very, very well, much better than I had anticipated, very well led as well. So everything is in Russia's favor at this point. The sanctions have blown back badly on the West. The Russian economy, contrary to some of the reports that you've heard, is not suffering badly. On the contrary, it's selling more oil, gas, minerals, resources, food to other customers around the world than they ever have before. So the real question is, how much longer do the Russians wait before they launch this offensive? And then probably they'll declare these areas of eastern Ukraine to be Russian. And whether they deem them to be a new independent Russian Ukraine or to simply assimilated with the rest of the Russian state, I don't know. But I think that's what will happen. And we show no signs of being willing to talk to them. We keep urging the Ukrainians to fight. The Ukrainians keep losing equipment and people. We keep pouring equipment into them. But I'm beginning to think that's turned into a terrible scam, because most of our money that was destined to provide equipment for the Ukrainians just goes to the Department of Defense. We ship equipment over there. Then the money is transferred from the Department of Defense to the defense industries. And the usual suspects on the Hill are rewarded with their donations and campaign supporters. So I'm beginning to wonder if anybody's really looking at that. Now, I know that the Defense Department said they were going to send people to Ukraine to try and track where all the equipment and money goes. Good luck. We know that the bazaars in Kosovo are full of American equipment for sale and European equipment. We've had reports from Iraq that the Kurds have been armed with equipment that came out of Ukraine. This, of course, was Erdogan's objection to the Swedish and Finnish membership bid. I don't think we've seen the end of it, and I wouldn't be surprised where this stuff ends up, and probably for the most part in the wrong hands. And in the meantime, what's Ukraine? It becomes some sort of rump state. I don't know, but it's a tragedy that could have been averted. All we had to do was listen to what Putin and the Russians were saying since 2008, what they would and would not tolerate. And if we'd done that and sat down and talked with them as mature adults, we could have come up with some sort of compromise. We did the opposite. We stonewalled with the goal of, quote unquote, punishing Russia, which is absurd nonsense. And we've ruined Eastern Europe. And I don't think this thing called NATO, and now increasingly the EU, is really going to hold together much longer and be terribly meaningful. And I don't think that was what Biden and his friends wanted, or the people on the Hill. But truthfully, I just don't see that the people in charge understand the gravity of their actions. You know, this thing with Mrs. Pelosi is almost comedic if you stop and think about it. And what we don't appreciate is the impact on the Chinese or the Russians. We never bothered to listen to the Russians. We haven't listened carefully to the Chinese. You know, for instance, Xi, who is now being vilified as some sort of Hitlerian figure, had identified the year 2049 as the probable date for peaceful reunification of Taiwan and China. Now, why would we be upset over that? Why would that concern us in any way? Everyone in Asia has recognized Beijing as the legitimate leader of the Chinese nation. Most people in Asia view what's happening right now between Taiwan and China as an internal Chinese affair, and they're trying to figure out why we want to intervene in it and turn it into a regional war. I run into people all the time say, well, those Chinese, look what happened to our manufacturing base. We got to get back at China for that. First of all, Americans sitting on the Hill and in corporate America sold our manufacturing base to China. Chinese didn't come over here and steal it in the middle of the night. In fact, in many cases, the Chinese didn't come over here looking for it. But when it became obvious that we have a ruling corporate elite, a class of millionaires and billionaires that are only too ready to sell us out in terms of jobs and industries, they took advantage of it. So don't blame China for the things we don't like about our country. Blame Americans. Blame the people on the Hill. Where were they? Where were all of these courageous senators who now talk about confronting Chinese military power when it was critical to save our manufacturing base, to save millions of jobs, to save our economy? Where were they? Well, they were silent. I don't hear much out of them right now, frankly. And I think, again, whenever you listen to people from the Hill, and this is a tragic comment, but it's true, you got to go back and look at the money flow. Where does the money come from that keeps them in office? And that explains an awful lot of what they say. You know, who's the donor? Who are the donors? And once you figure out if it's George Soros or it's defense industries or it's the oil industry or something else, then you begin to make sense out of what you're hearing. But I think most Americans are coming around to the understanding that Republicans or Democrats we really aren't represented in Washington. A friend of mine was talking to me earlier today, and he's got a lot of experience on the Hill, worked in Congress and in the Senate. And he said, Doug, he said, what the people in Moscow and Beijing don't understand is that the majority of people in Washington are pimples on the backside of American history. They don't matter. But unfortunately, people in Moscow and Beijing have concluded that they do matter, that they're serious. And as a result, they're acting the way they do. I mean, the one thing that Nancy Pelosi did accomplish on her trip was to solidify the relationship between Moscow and Beijing. I would not be surprised if we did not hear a formal announcement and watched some sort of signing ceremony bringing this alliance to fruition between the Russians and the Chinese, making it a real military alliance. The Russians have already said to the Chinese that they will back China in whatever it deems appropriate, whatever it wants to do. And we continue to sit there and act as though this is a joke. The Russians are not afraid of us. They know us, unfortunately, for what we are. I think Putin has a healthy respect for us if we know what we're doing, but he knows we don't know what we're doing. The Chinese, they don't understand that. They think Pelosi is the member of a government that is about to pass this Menendez-Graham bill that reverses Taiwan's status and makes us, once again, Taiwan's ally. And this is a very dangerous thing because it's not necessary. The Chinese have no plans to invade Taiwan. Now they may feel that they have to. And remember, the Chinese are not interested in destroying the industry that exists on Taiwan. They're also not interested in putting their industries at risk either. So there's this whole picture of China in the United States I think is just fundamentally false, really false. I'm not saying that, we should all grip hands and sing Kumbaya. What I'm simply saying is we need to do business on the basis of identified interests. And if you respect those interests, you can avoid conflict. Let's just look at the facts. We're not the world's sole superpower. We're not the same country we were in 1991. We have enormous problems, particularly with the economy, with internal societal cohesion, which is a polite way of saying we're divided along racial lines and economic lines. Why would you do these things? Why would you poke these two cobras and expect them to react any differently from the way they have? So I think my friend is right. I think these people will go down in history as having created conditions for destruction and anarchy in the international system, have further eroding our position, undermining our prestige and our credibility. And hopefully that's it, because the biggest mistake we could make is to suddenly sail most of the United States Navy over there and present the Chinese with a target array and make demands on them. Because at that point, the Chinese will act. And the Chinese are not like us. They are not like us. They think carefully. They consider all the options. For them, the use of force is the last resort. But once they decide to use it, they will go all the way to the end, if necessary, to be successful. In the meantime, they will do what they can to undermine us and our position in Asia. There's no question about it. What else would you expect them to do? But we need to understand that they're now on a very different path, and they're not going to get off that path for some time, at least not until we demonstrate that we have a completely new government in the hands of responsible, educated, mature adults.
Herr Bundeskanzler, nochmal ganz herzlich willkommen hier in Mülheim. Vielen Dank für Ihre Zeit.
Vielen Dank für die Einladung.
The German population is not very pleased with the current chancellor and his government. At some point, the Germans are going to vote in a new government. And Germans are different from Frenchmen or Italians. The French and the Italians will go into the streets and there will be a revolution. Germans don't tend to do that. Germans say, no, let's go to the polls and vote in a different bunch. So eventually, I think you'll get a group in Germany that will take an interest in Germany and come to some sort of arrangement with Moscow. This whole business of German dependence on Moscow for fuel and heat and so forth, I think people always assume that any deal you make with Russia is a deal with some terrible devil. Again, you've got to look at Russia. What is Russia's needs? The Russians desperately need to do business with Europe. They want to do business with Europe. The Russians want to be, frankly, viewed as part of Europe. We've made it impossible for them to do that. The Germans have unfortunately followed our lead. I think that will be reversed. And then we'll find that we are probably no longer wanted in Europe. I think we're going to have similar problems in Asia because I think the Asians are going to view us as unnecessarily destabilizing. You know, we were once seen as this force for stability and reason. You know, we have had a very irresponsible, reckless group of people who've decided that they can play. So that's why I said I think these people are play acting. They don't understand the strategic consequences. And again, as I try to tell people, if you want to know what's the probability of you being convicted in a court of a serious crime in China, it's 99%. If you want to know what the probability of being convicted in a court of law of a serious crime in Japan is, it's 99%. If you want to know what the probability of being convicted of a serious crime is in a court in Vietnam, it's 99%. Of course, in North Korea, it's 100%. We know that. But the point I try to make to people is that you step back and understand this is a different world from ours. Mm-hmm. Different culture, different way of thinking. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It also doesn't mean that we're necessarily right, but they're different. And I'm so tired of people in Washington condemning everyone left and right for not adequately tending to whatever we think is appropriate in their country. You know, we used to take the position that what countries do, what governments do in their own countries is their affair. And if we didn't like something, we would discuss it, but we would do so privately. That's been thrown overboard since the Second World War as we've run around and proselytized and pushed our ideas. And I ask everyone to look back on the last 50, 60, 70 years and tell me, how well has that worked?